Now I would like to introduce you to Assistant Secretary of State, Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs, James O'Brien. Mr. James O'Brien assumed his role as Assistant Secretary of State for Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs in October 5, 2023. Ambassador O'Brien served as Sanctions Coordinator at the State Department beginning April 2022. He's a former career employee of the State Department and recipient of numerous performance awards, and served 2 previous U.S. administrations as a special presidential envoy. As the first presidential envoy for hostage affairs between 2015 and 2017, he helped establish the office and worked for the safe return of 100 American citizens. From 1989 to 2001, he served as a senior advisor to Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Principal Deputy Director of Policy Planning, and Presidential Envoy to the Balkans. Over the course of his career at the State Department, he has led a large and successful sanctions program and advised on the range of issues, including peace negotiations in Europe, scientific and environmental agreements, and initiatives to investigate and prosecute persons responsible for war crimes. I'm sorry this is long, but that's because he's so important, and we are so honored to have him. So, Mr. O'Brien also negotiated agreements protecting intellectual property rights for scientific cooperation with China, very important issue, promoted environmentally sound international trade negotiations for hazardous and recyclable materials, and worked to make public-private partnerships and corporate social responsibility an important element in American foreign policy. Ambassador O'Brien was previously a founder and vice chair of Albright Stonebridge Group, an international advisory firm. He earned the JD from Yale Law School, yay, fellow lawyer, a MA from University of Pittsburgh, and a BA from Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, a native of Nebraska. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Assistant Secretary Jim O'Brien, please, you have the stage.
It's a real honor to be here with you this evening. I was told 5 minutes, but that's a challenge, not a time limitation. I'm very, very pleased to be here for 2 reasons. The U.S.'s special friendship with Romania, and I'll tell you a story or 2 about my experience, but also because you're honoring General Clark tonight. So, Wes, I came here from a discussion with German diplomats about the Balkans. And 29 years ago, we spent weeks in Dayton, Ohio, and then months trying to solidify peace in that region. And it's held, which is a remarkable thing for any peace agreement. And I think 29 years ago, you were a 4-star general at age 18. It's pretty remarkable. But the lessons I learned from you are still relevant today. I deal every day with the largest land war in Europe since World War II in Ukraine. And we're looking at how does force and diplomacy work together. And the lessons I learned from working with Wes all those years ago play every single day when we talk about creating a space where diplomats can bring peace and that peace can be sustained. It's also the case, we see it in other regions, where the Secretary Blinken is now in Jordan and in Turkey talking about Syria. And one of the first questions asked out of the meetings he had in Jordan was, there was a very strong provision in the Dayton Agreement to deal with some of the problems confronting Syria. Can you tell us how that happened? And it was actually a provision regarding foreign fighters that Wes and I worked on at the time. So I mentioned that partly because it's a chance for us to catch up, and thank you all for watching while I do that. But it's important for all of us to remember that the lessons we bring to this work, whether it's the former ambassadors, the other diplomats in the room, or in any sector, that what we do lives on well beyond the space in which we first work on it. And that, I think, is worth all of us remembering when we look at the lessons that Andre talked about, this association, and generally all those who've contributed to the U.S.-Romania bilateral relationship. And I'll just say a couple of words about this before we turn you over to your main course. The first is, as a security partner, Romania is unsurpassed. So a few weeks after I began this latest tour in the U.S. government, I was asked to deal with a particular issue related to our sanctions. And that was that Russia had shut off Ukraine's access to the outside world. It was sitting on, at that time, about 65 million tons of grain. Ukraine was the major provider of grain to the global south. Food prices were spiking around the world, and there were many countries saying that the war had to end, that Russia had to be given a victory simply because Ukraine wasn't able to get its grain to the outside world. So we began to work with Ukraine's neighbors to make sure this grain could get to the people who desperately needed it. And I've got to say, Romania was first stepping up to make extraordinary efforts to make sure that Ukrainian grain has been able to reach global markets. And it's done that in a way that benefits not just Ukraine and not just the recipients of the grain, but Romania itself and Moldova as well. That we are seeing an increase in traffic and trade along the Danube corridor. Small ports that handled a few thousand tons of grain a month were handling tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tons of grain a month. All of that is essential to making sure that needy people around the world can be fed, that Ukraine is able to withstand Russia's aggression. And Romania has done that in a way that geography allowed it the opportunity, but it took real political will and a willingness to stand up to the aggressor. And that is fundamentally what allies and partners do together. So I'm really proud to have played a small role in seeing Romania act as a contributor, a huge contributor to the security of Europe. And that's been a really welcome development of just the last few years. So as a partner, as an ally in NATO, and a partner more broadly in seeing democracy and freedom be defended, Romania stands without anyone surpassing it in the U.S. partnerships. Now, I mentioned this has economic benefit, and I want to reflect just for a moment on how far we've come. When we look at the work that other ambassadors have done since Jim Rosapep's time, the time of Al Moses, Hans Klempt, and now through to Mark Gittenstein, with whom I work every day in his current role, we've seen enormous changes in Romania. I began to work extensively in Romania a bit in the 90s, and then a lot in private business in 2002, 2003, 2004. After Romania joined the European Union, the changes are remarkable. So we see GDP has quadrupled. We see that US investment in Romania has more than trebled. And I see around me the evidence of wealth and opportunity for Romania's citizens that was really beyond the imagination of people working in the country in the 90s and early 2000s. So per capita income in Romania now sits at 80% of the EU average. It was 44% just over 15 years ago. That is a change in the opportunity that future generations will have. And we need to see that we build on that in the way that we firm up the partnership between the US and Romania. But those are just numbers. And I want to talk briefly about the challenge in front of us. And Ambassador Moraro mentioned that we need to see democracy triumph in Romania. And I want to offer a word or two about the US perspective on this. So, as all of you know, Romania will rerun the presidential election. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves that we're facing two kinds of challenges. And once again, Romania is in the vanguard of helping the West, of helping the European Union, the NATO alliance, address both these challenges. One challenge is from outside the system. Russian and other actors who want to hack our systems, create chaos, and try to prey upon the weakness and the anger of many of the citizens of our country. And we need together to find a way to uncover what is happening, illuminate it, and help our citizens educate themselves so that they don't fall prey to simple stories or rosy tales that are offered as solutions to the problems they have in their lives. That's something we will work on with Romania between now and the election, but even beyond the election, so that together we're able to have a citizenry that is fully informed, but also accurately informed, and able to make decisions that it needs. That's a challenge for us. And in this regard, the other challenge is we have to admit, in one way, we are at the end of the enthusiasm that greeted the collapse of the socialist bloc. People now measure their lives not by whether they are better than their parents or grandparents, but by whether they feel good to themselves and their dreams of a few years ago, or whether they seem as good as the people who have benefited extraordinarily from the growth of freedom and private sector opportunity. That makes a lot of people angry. And it's on us, those of us who believe in the system, who believe in the rule of law, who believe in the promise that freedom brings to people, to persuade people to invest more in themselves and more in the system that has grown up over the last years. When I say system, I don't mean anything that is governing every part of someone's lives, but I mean the principle that everyone gets an opportunity and that with the proper education and freedom, they will be able to take advantage of that opportunity, make themselves richer, and contribute to their societies so that they are more free. What we saw in Romania was in part a reaction to outside manipulation and attempt to hack the system, but it was also an expression by a number of citizens that they are tired and a bit angry and want to see some real change from their politicians. Those of us who want to be a part of the answer to that, this is a clarion call that the parties of the system, the parties that have been in power, need to respond to what people most demand. There are great signs. I mentioned positive economic statistics. I think what is happening with likely soon the visa waiver program, certainly the membership in Schengen, now allows people to have a real opportunity to have perspectives and experiences that would have been inconceivable 35 years ago. But it's on all of us to persuade people that they should continue to be committed to that process. That's the challenge we have over the next months. Now, I'm a few weeks away from being promoted to being a citizen. And in my limited time left in the office, I am going to spend time working with the authorities in Romania to make sure that the next election is prepared well, that there's a lot of international help to address both of these challenges, so that any observer can look at the election and say, this was run well, it was fair, and the outcome supported democracy and the commitments Romania has undertaken to the EU and to NATO. But that's the choice of the Romanian people. I will work to do what the US can, and then as a private citizen, I'm going to cheer Romania on and do what I can from outside to make sure that that promise is fulfilled. So with that, my promise to you is fulfilled because you're done with your salads and it's time to go on to the main course. And I really thank you for sharing this time with me.